English is a West Germanic language that was first spoken in early medieval England and is now a global lingua franca. English is either the official language or an official language in almost 60 sovereign states. It is the most commonly spoken language in the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, Ireland, and New Zealand, and is widely spoken in some areas of the Caribbean, Africa, and South Asia. It is the third most common native language in the world, after Mandarin and Spanish. It is the most widely learned second language and an official language of the United Nations, of the European Union, and of many other world and regional international organizations. English has developed over the course of more than 1,400 years. The earliest forms of English, a set of Anglo-Frisian dialects brought to Great Britain by Anglo-Saxon settlers in the 5th century, are called Old English. Middle English began in the late 11th century with the Norman conquest of England. Early modern English began in the late 15th century with the introduction of the printing press to London and the King James Bible, and the start of the Great Vowel Shift. Through the worldwide influence of the British Empire, modern English spread around the world from the 17th to mid-20th centuries, through all types of printed and electronic media, as well as the emergence of the United States as a global superpower. English has become the leading language of international discourse and the lingua franca in many regions and in professional contexts such as science, navigation, and law. Modern English has little inflection compared with many other languages, and relies more on auxiliary verbs and word order for the expression of complex tenses, aspect and mood, as well as passive constructions, interrogatives and some negation. Despite noticeable variation among the accents and dialects of English used in different countries and regions, in terms of phonetics and phonology, and sometimes also vocabulary, grammar and spelling, English speakers from around the world are able to communicate with one another with relative ease. Classification: English is an Indo-European language, and belongs to the West Germanic group of the Germanic languages. Most closely related to English are the Frisian languages, and English and Frisian form the Anglo-Frisian subgroup within West Germanic. Old Saxon and its descendant Low German languages are also closely related, and sometimes Low German, English, and Frisian are grouped together as the Ingvaeonic and North Sea Germanic languages. Modern English descends from Middle English, which in turn descends from Old English. Particular dialects of Old and Middle English also developed into a number of other English languages, including Scots and the extinct Fingalian and Forth and Bargy dialects of Ireland. English is classified as a Germanic language because it shares new language features with other Germanic languages such as Dutch, German, and Swedish. These shared innovations show that the languages have descended from a single common ancestor, which linguists call Proto-Germanic. Some shared features of Germanic languages are the use of modal verbs, the division of verbs into strong and weak classes, and the sound changes affecting Proto-Indo-European consonants, known as Grimm's and Werner's laws. Through Grimm's law, the word for foot begins with F in Germanic languages, but its cognates in other Indo-European languages begin with P. English is classified as an Anglo-Frisian language because Frisian and English share other features, such as the palatalization of consonants that were velar consonants in Proto-Germanic. English sing, sang, sung, Dutch zingen, zong, gezongen, German singen, sang, gesungen. English laugh, laughed, Dutch and German lachen, lachte. English foot, Dutch voet, German fast, Norwegian and Swedish fot. Latin pes, stemped, modern Greek pi omicron delta iota podi, Russian pod, Sanskrit pad, English cheese, Frisian tsis, German case and Dutch ka. AAS English. Like the other insular Germanic languages, Icelandic and Faroese developed independently of the continental Germanic languages and their influences. English is thus not mutually intelligible with any continental Germanic language, differing in vocabulary, syntax, and phonology, although some, such as Dutch, show strong affinities with English, especially with its earlier stages, because English through its history has changed considerably in response to contact with other languages, particularly Old Norse and Norman French. Some scholars have argued that English can be considered a mixed language or a Creole, a theory called the Middle English Creole hypothesis. Although the high degree of influence from these languages on the vocabulary and grammar of modern English is widely acknowledged, most specialists in language contact do not consider English to be a true mixed language. History. Proto-Germanic to Old English. The earliest form of English is called Old English or Anglo-Saxon. Old English developed from a set of North Sea Germanic dialects originally spoken along the coasts of Frisia, Lower Saxony, Jutland, and southern Sweden by Germanic tribes known as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. In the 5th century, the Anglo-Saxons settled Britain and the Romans withdrew from Britain. By the 7th century, the Germanic language of the Anglo-Saxons became dominant in Britain, replacing the languages of Roman Britain, Common Brittonic, a Celtic language, and Latin, brought to Britain by the Roman occupation. England and English named after the Angles. Old English was divided into 4 dialects: the Anglian dialects, Mercian and Northumbrian, and the Saxon dialects, Kentish and West Saxon. Through the educational reforms of King Alfred in the 9th century and the influence of the Kingdom of Wessex, the West Saxon dialect became the standard written variety. The epic poem Beowulf is written in West Saxon, and the earliest English poem, Sedmon's Hymn, is written in Northumbrian. Modern English developed mainly from Mercian, but the Scots language developed from Northumbrian. A few short inscriptions from the early period of Old English were written using a runic script. By the 6th century, a Latin alphabet was adopted, written with half-uncial letter forms. It included the runic letters Win and LT, W and GT, and Thorn and LT, TH and GT, and the modified Latin letters Eth and LT, TH and GT, and Ash and LT, A and GT. Old English is very different from modern English and difficult for 21st century English speakers to understand. Its grammar was similar to that of modern German, and its closest relative is Old Frisian. Nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and verbs had many more inflectional endings and forms, and word order was much freer than in modern English. Modern English has case forms in pronouns and a few verb endings, but Old English had case endings in nouns as well, and verbs had more person and number endings. The translation of Matthew chapter 8 verse 20 from 1000 CE shows examples of case endings on a verb ending. Foxes habath holu and havonen fuglis nest. Foxes habath holu and havonen fugel as nest. Fox nom. Place have prs. Place hole acc. Place and heaven sg bird nom. Place nest acc. Place. Foxes have holes and the birds of heaven nests. Middle English in the period from the 8th to the 12th century. Old English gradually transformed through language contact into Middle English. Middle English is often arbitrarily defined as beginning with the conquest of England by William the Conqueror in 1066, but it developed further in the period from 1200 to 1450. First, the waves of Norse colonization of northern parts of the British Isles in the 8th and 9th centuries put Old English into intense contact with Old Norse, a North Germanic language. Norse influence was strongest in the northeastern varieties of Old English spoken in the Danelaw area around York. which was the center of Norse colonization. Today these features are still particularly present in Scots and Northern English. However, the center of Norsified English seems to have been in the Midlands around Lindsey, and after 920 CE when Lindsey was reincorporated into the Anglo-Saxon polity. Norse features spread from there into English varieties that had not been in intense contact with Norse speakers. Some elements of Norse influence that persist in all English varieties today are the pronouns beginning with th, which replaced the Anglo-Saxon pronouns with h. With the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the now Norsified Old English language was subject to contact with the Old Norman language, a Romance language closely related to modern French. The Norman language in England eventually developed into Anglo-Norman, because Norman was spoken primarily by the elites and nobles, while the lower classes continued speaking Anglo-Saxon. The influence of Norman consisted of introducing a wide range of loanwords related to politics, legislation and prestigious social domains. Middle English also greatly simplified the inflectional system, probably in order to reconcile Old Norse and Old English, which were inflectionally different but morphologically similar. The distinction between nominative and accusative case was lost except in personal pronouns. The instrumental case was dropped, and the use of the genitive case was limited to describing possession. The inflectional system regularized many irregular inflectional forms, and gradually simplified the system of agreement, making word order less flexible. By the Wycliffe Bible of the 1380s, the passage Matthew chapter 8 verse 20 was written Fox's hand ends, and Bridus of Hewin hand nesters. Here the plural suffix "en" on the verb have is still retained, but none of the case endings on the nouns are present. By the 12th century Middle English was fully developed, integrating both Norse and Norman features. It continued to be spoken until the transition to early modern English around 1500. Middle English literature includes Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, and Malory's La Morte d'Arthur. In the Middle English period, the use of regional dialects in writing proliferated, and dialect traits were even used for effect by authors such as Chaucer. Early Modern English. The next period in the history of English was Early Modern English. Early Modern English was characterized by the great vowel shift, inflectional simplification, and linguistic standardization. The great vowel shift affected the stressed long vowels of Middle English. It was a chain shift, meaning that each shift triggered a subsequent shift in the vowel system. Mid and open vowels were raised, and close vowels were broken into diphthongs. For example, the word bite was originally pronounced as the word beat as today, and the second vowel in the word about was pronounced as the word boot as today. The great vowel shift explains many irregularities in spelling, since English retains many spellings from Middle English, and it also explains why English vowel letters have very different pronunciations from the same letters in other languages. English began to rise in prestige during the reign of Henry V. Around 1430, the Court of Chancery in Westminster began using English in its official documents, and a new standard form of Middle English, known as Chancery Standard, developed from the dialects of London and the East Midlands. In 1476, William Caxton introduced the printing press to England and began publishing the first printed books in London, expanding the influence of this form of English. Literature from the early modern period includes the works of William Shakespeare and the translation of the Bible commissioned by King James I. Even after the vowel shift, the language still sounded different from modern English. For example, the consonant clusters knots GNSW in knight, nat, and sword were still pronounced. Many of the grammatical features that a modern reader of Shakespeare might find quaint or archaic represent the distinct characteristics of early modern English. In the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, written in early modern English, Matthew chapter 8 verse 20 says, "The foxes hour holes and the birds of the air howe nests." This exemplifies the loss of case and its effects on sentence structure, and the introduction of loanwords from French and word replacements. Spread of modern English. By the late 18th century, the British Empire had facilitated the spread of English through its colonies and geopolitical dominance. Commerce, science and technology, diplomacy, art, and formal education all contributed to English becoming the first truly global language. English also facilitated worldwide international communication. As England continued to form new colonies, these in turn became independent and developed their own norms for how to speak and write the language. English was adopted in North America, India, parts of Africa, Australasia, and many other regions. In the post-colonial period, some of the newly created nations that had multiple indigenous languages opted to continue using English as the official language to avoid the political difficulties inherent in promoting any one indigenous language above the others. In the 20th century, the growing economic and cultural influence of the United States and its status as a superpower following the Second World War has, along with worldwide broadcasting in English by the BBC and other broadcasters, significantly accelerated the spread of the language across the planet. By the 21st century, English was more widely spoken and written than any language has ever been. A major feature in the early development of modern English was the codification of explicit norms for standard usage, and the dissemination through official media such as public education and state-sponsored publications. In 1755, Samuel Johnson published his A Dictionary of the English Language, which introduced a standard set of spelling conventions and usage norms. In 1828, Noah Webster published the American Dictionary of the English Language in an effort to establish a norm for speaking and writing American English that was independent from the British standard. Within Britain, non-standard or lower-class dialect features were increasingly stigmatized, leading to the quick spread of the prestige varieties among the middle classes. In terms of grammatical evolution, modern English has now reached a stage where the loss of case is almost complete, and where SVO word order is mostly fixed. Some changes, such as the use of to support, have become universalized. The use of progressive forms in ing appears to be spreading to new constructions, and forms such as had been being built are becoming more common. Regularization of irregular forms also slowly continues, and analytical alternatives to inflectional forms are becoming more common. British English is also undergoing change under the influence of American English, fueled by the strong presence of American English in the media and the prestige associated with the U.S. as a world power.